Good morning. My name is Renee Grace, for those that don't know me. I'm currently Director of Investment and Development at Arts Queensland. We have a few housekeeping matters before we begin today. For the comfort of other guests, could you please turn off your mobile phones as we are recording? The toilets are located past the cafe on level 1 and downstairs level 0 via the lift or to the right. Please take note of the fire exits via the nearest exit door. In the event of an emergency, the assembly point is at the Queensland Art Gallery Plaza. The Edge Fire Wardens will direct you to the assembly point once you have exited the building. And finally, the State Library of Queensland is a Queensland Government building and a non-smoking venue. Please exit the building if you need to do that, and you need to be 4 metres away from any entry. So, welcome to today's Peer Assessment Induction Forum. I'd like to respectfully acknowledge the traditional owners of this land, elders both past and present, and I'd also like to welcome everyone here today and thank you for not only participating in today's event, but your contribution to being an assessor for Arts Queensland. We greatly appreciate all of your efforts and couldn't undertake our peer assessment without you. So today's forum, we're going to be looking at the role of Arts Queensland, the Arts and Cultural Investment Framework, your role and responsibilities as assessors. We're going to briefly go into the Code of Conduct, remuneration, and focus on an assessment and moderation process, and then have a fabulous Q&A session. So we're really trying to make it more of a workshop base for you. So at any time, please ask a question. Throughout the session, we will require a microphone so our webinar guests can also hear your question. So this very interesting flowchart we have here is the Arts Queensland Arts and Cultural Investment Framework. So basically, for those that don't know, the role of Arts Queensland is to support Queenslanders' access to arts and cultural experiences and to enable growth of the arts sector and a strong community of the arts. This is informed by our Arts and Cultural Investment Framework. Arts Queensland manages a suite of investment programs and provides $38 million annually to support individual artists, arts organisations. We manage and maintain cultural infrastructure such as the Queensland Art Gallery and Museum and provide public spaces for arts production and engagement. We provide corporate governance support and oversight of the 4 arts statutory bodies and 4 government-owned arts companies. We provide arts and cultural policy and strategy advice to the Queensland Government, and we're a central body for the coordination of all budget bids, media, public engagement, ministerial support and liaison across Arts Queensland, the statutory bodies and the government-owned arts organisations. So, Arts Queensland's principles of investment. They are return-driven. Return-driven in that we invest to deliver quality artistic, cultural, social and economic returns for Queensland. Recipients are required to provide outcome reports to their funded activities which explain their expenditure and income. We manage risk. We invest along the spectrum of the arts and cultural activity from low to high risk, from development to growth, from new ideas to evidence-based demand. Case studies and other data are drawn from funding recipients and published online to better inform arts and cultural practice. We are customers first, focused. Our investment is informed by what Queenslanders want and need. We value diversity. We invest to capitalise on Queensland's diversity, including arts practice, heritage, cultures, age group and abilities. We invest in local culture and support local decision making. We ensure our behaviour is transparent and accountable, from assessing proposals to reporting on investment outcomes. So this is an overview. This is over 2 pages actually, our funding programs. The funding programs are open to artists and organisations delivering arts and cultural outcomes for Queenslanders. As you can see, our current funding programs include the Individuals Fund, the Playing Queensland Fund, the Queensland Arts Showcase, the Regional Arts Development Fund, or RADF, Regional Arts Fund, the Indigenous Arts Development Fund, and an Artist in Residence program called AIR2. You'll note that this information is provided online, but we've just provided you with a little bit more information about timing for decision making. Prior to assessment, peer assessors will be provided with the relevant program guidelines, frequently asked questions, and also the arts and cultural investment framework in conjunction with your handbook. Now, we have provided everyone today with a copy of the handbook for peer assessors. Assessment is conducted for all eligible applications. Assessment processes for each fund may vary for the structure of the fund. So they could be rolling, like QAST, the Queensland Arts Showcase, or round-based, like the Individuals Fund or RADF. Assessors are required to complete their assessment within advised timeframes. This is critical to our funding program, as we've published timelines and they're committed, and it's also around the announcement of the decisions. Does anyone have any questions about the funding programs process to date? No, we're good. So, what is the role of a peer assessor? Assessors provide, they're here to provide information, and it's critical for equitable funding decisions. Your input is important as you have the specialist knowledge relevant to specific art forms and provide us with an arts and cultural context. As a peer assessor, you assess eligible applications within the timeframe designated, you provide expert advice, and you participate in periodic meetings and provide feedback on the assessment process. There are other information that's also very important, which is funding decisions are subject to a Judicial Review Act of 1991, and written communication, including assessment reports, are subject to the Rights of Information Act 2009 and the Information Privacy Act of 2009. So your comments and conclusions need to be professional and supported by clear and objective references to the evidence and other material on which your findings are based. Assessment is always confidential. So while Arts Queensland publishes assessors online, it does not disclose which assessors are involved in individual applications. Assessors need to also be respectful of confidentiality and must maintain confidentiality of information that is not publicly available. The other thing that is also important is looking at conflicts of interest. As we know, within the arts industry, we know a lot of people, and comments should be objective and without personal professional bias. Conflicts of interest are not unusual, and assessors are required to declare any conflicts between themselves and a funding applicant to Arts Queensland. Conflicts can be actual, so you currently have a conflict between our official duties or other personal interests. Perceived, you have a conflicting interest between a person or an official interest. Or potential, so your personal interest does not conflict with other duties that could become an actual or perceived conflict in the future. Arts Queensland can easily manage the conflict depending upon the nature of it, so we can always remove you from the application and it's no problem whatsoever. The other important element is the Code of Conduct, which you'll find in your handbook, and also an outline about the remuneration, fees and allowances. These are set by the Queensland Government's remuneration guidelines. Any questions? So, that's gone through your role as an assessor. Now let's look at Arts Queensland's role. So basically, Arts Queensland starts the process, supports and provides advice to applicants, looks at the eligibility of the application, and then provides administrative processes through the process. So looking at moderation, in the instance of inconsistent assessment recommendations, Arts Queensland determines if assessments require moderation and will convene relevant assessors and facilitate a moderation discussion to reach a consensus. This can be by panel or via email or via teleconference. Moderation recommendations are reported to the Deputy Director General for consideration. The reporting is very important in this process as well. So within Arts Queensland's role, we look to report to the Deputy Director General when completing the assessment process. We provide them with the applications, details of the amounts requested, relevant moderation comments, look at the statement of reason for each decision, statistical information about the application, and any other information provided or recommended by the peer assessors. And then it moves to an approval process, which is your recommendations are then sought approval from the Minister for the Arts or a delegate. The assessment process. Each Arts Queensland fund has its own defined assessment process and time frame, which Arts Queensland will discuss with assessors before it commences. The general steps are, you're invited to assess, score, and provide comments on an application. If moderation is required, this is a debate-driven, as I've suggested, by email, by panel, or by teleconference. Always please remember to refer back to the criteria when you're undertaking moderation and ensure you're delivering an objective decision. Feedback is then collated and recorded, and then the panel signs off on the agreed outcomes. Sorry, I don't know what's going on with technology. So, I thought we were moving along so smoothly. Okay, I've got it. So we're nearly at the fun Q&A part, so we'll just keep moving. Assessment criteria. So the assessment criteria supports outcomes to deliver the Queensland Government's commitments. Applicants respond to the assessment criteria when making an application for Arts Queensland investment. Assessment is therefore based on how strongly the application meets the assessment criteria. Assessment criteria can be evidenced by indicators, and indicators are a sample of the type of evidence that could demonstrate achievement of each assessment criteria. For example, assessment criteria quality has different indicators for specific funds. So let's look at quality across the three funds. So I'm just going to give you some examples about RADF, individuals and QASP. So for RADF, the Regional Arts Development Fund, when looking at quality, you need to look at, does the application produce or contribute to high quality arts and cultural initiatives for local communities? Is there proven capacity to effectively support and deliver arts and cultural services? In comparison to the Individuals Fund, where does the application demonstrate a high standard of artistic or cultural achievement in the applicant's field, appropriate to their stage of their career? And does the professional standing of the applicant provide evidence? And quality for QASP. Does the application provide artistic achievements, contribution to a vibrant and accessible arts and cultural outcome? Is there evidence of a high standard of artistic product? Does it demonstrate artistic progression, innovation, creativeness, creative ambition? And does it engage with acclaimed artists if you're looking at the Arts Illuminate? So that just gives you a few examples of when you are looking at specific applications, how you can, that you need to be looking at the fund criteria. Okay. I'll keep moving along just with scoring and moderation, and then we're going to go to questions and answers. So for those that haven't undertaken peer assessment before, the scoring and moderation is a really important part of the process. And what we find is that is probably the most contentious part of the process, because when you are looking at things objectively, it's about how do you clearly and precisely articulate this when you're providing your response. So scoring values are unique to each fund, but the principles are the same. So when you're looking at the Queensland Arts Showcase, you have a 1 to 5 score, so 1 being limited, 5 being excellent. And scores, you need to look at scores on how strongly the application meets the criteria. You need to weigh each criteria evenly, and that's something else that we find comes up a lot, that people don't look at each criteria evenly. They might put more into quality or into reach. You need to complete the assessment within the time frame, and you need to remember that it's important to actively contribute to the moderation process if the application goes to moderation. Please note that scoring are used for ranking purposes as a guidance tool only, and that the opinion of the panellist is of equal value. So your written opinion is as important as your scoring. There we go. So, do we have any questions about what I've discussed so far? We're all good? So that's just a bit of a recap. This information is all available online. The Peer Assessor Handbook is very comprehensive, and of course the Program Manager is also really important. We do have a number of Arts Queensland Program Managers here today, so if you have any specific questions around RADF, QASP, PQF, the Plain Queensland Fund, or the Individuals Fund, please feel free to discuss them with the Arts Queensland staff member. Okay, so what we're going to do now is we're going to move on to the Q&A session. So, I'd now like to welcome our special guests to the stage, Mark Fawcett, Meg Van and Adam Tucker, for our panel discussion. So while they're moving on to the stage, just give a little bit of an introduction. So we've got Adam first. He's currently the General Manager of Camerata of St John's, Queensland Chamber Orchestra. Adam has led an accomplished career as a professional dancer with international acclaim and has served as an industry peer for Arts Queensland on the Music, Theatre, Dance Festival and Organisation Funding Assessment panels. We then have Meg Van, who's an independent writer and published author and teacher in community and academia. Meg Van spent 8 years at the Queensland Writers' Centre, 3 as the CEO, and is currently also an Australia Council peer assessor. And finally, Mark Fawcett, who's currently the manager of the Cardinia Cultural Centre in Melbourne and has over 25 years' experience in arts and cultural sector. Mark is an Australia Council peer and Hepman Award panellist and inaugural member of the Arts Queensland touring panel for the Plain Queensland Fund. Welcome. So, I'd like to start by asking a few questions. So Mark, what would you say are your strategies for assessing applications across different art forms?
Right. Look, I think first of all, I like to skim read what I've been sent. Normally you'll get sent a series of applications. It won't just be a one-off. And it just helps to do a skim, or it helps me to do a skim read, just to start understanding, okay, what have I got to assess here? And it'll give you a little bit of a feeling for, I guess, overall quality, so that you're not just reviewing something in isolation. You know, it's really easy, I think, to pick up one application, read it, assess it, and then sort of 3 applications down the track, you've got something a little bit similar, and you think, oh, I'm out of whack here. So it does help me to do that skim read. I guess it also helps, a bit like study, to be in a nice, comfortable place. Don't do it at work when you're really, really busy trying to, do phone calls and emails at the same time, because somebody's livelihood in some ways does depend on what you're doing. I always try and think, you don't normally know who the other panellists are, but you've been given the role because you've got a depth of knowledge. And I certainly don't profess to have the depth of knowledge across the board. There's some skills in areas that I know about, and some that I know there's probably a panellist that has a better in-depth understanding. And I think that's really important to remember as well. Arts Queensland are normally fairly strategic at how they put the panel together, and Indigenous arts is probably a good one to give you an example of. The detailed knowledge you need of Indigenous arts is quite incredible, as I'm sure you know. There's some really good specialists out in the sector. My knowledge is good, but it's not as good as some of those people. And I will give my opinion as I know it, but at the same time, the mind is open, and I think that somebody's probably going to chime in at the moderation part if we're not all in unison, and just go, wow, and they've nailed it. And I think that's probably it, Renee.
Fabulous, thank you, Mark. Just following on from that, Meg, how much time would you allow to read and consider an application?
It varies. I think when I first started assessing, and I don't mean to terrify anyone, but I would spend an hour, assessing a thing. I think nowadays the average is probably about half an hour. Some applications which are succinct and without a lot of supporting material, and that's not necessarily a negative, it may just be a very clear, succinct application, I might assess it a little bit more quickly. But some applications, particularly if I am assessing outside an art form or in a new emerging or innovative area of my art form, I'll take a bit more time and I'll do some research outside the materials supplied just to ensure that I'm across the issues and the people involved in that application.
Thanks, Meg. Adam, given that an application is assessed on how strongly it meets assessment criteria, how do you consider each application on its contribution to that assessment criteria?
It varies, although what makes the position actually quite easy is the framework that's been developed, especially for the Showcase program. The assessment itself, the actual form itself, is so user-friendly, and start from the top and work your way through. And it self-guides you through the questions that I ask myself while I'm reading the application, and also ask the applicant that's writing. So that's probably the easiest answer there. Focusing on the criteria, though, is something that's quite. It's something that It's been the answer to a lot of personal conflict and questions. There's a great weight of responsibility, I find, and especially when I started, and I still do, it comes back to that point of going, these applicants are putting their livelihood in your hands, so there is a responsibility, and I find that the criteria is there to both protect me and that weight of responsibility, but it's also what provides a framework across all art forms and across all variety of applications, that I've found that if I just concentrate on what those criteria are and whether the application is meeting those criteria, there's also a platform that's uniform across my assessment rankings and the way that I'm making assessment decisions. So it's something that's become quite important in the process that I use when I assess the variety of applications.
Thank you, Adam. So Mark, just back to you. How do you provide constructive assessment feedback?
I always think, I think in terms of myself, and what would I want to know if my application is successful or unsuccessful, and can I provide some handy tips, if you like, for an unsuccessful application, why they didn't actually achieve the criteria. We're all professionals. It is about doing that respectfully. You don't want to sort of, ruin somebody's career overnight by providing really damning comments. So it's about being constructive with those comments and about being helpful, and put yourself in, that applicant's shoes. I mean, we're all at different levels of experience. You will be assessing emerging artists. You'll be assessing really professional artists. You'll also be, assessing works from individuals and from companies. And you've got to think about the resources a large arts company can put into an application as opposed to a one-off artist, and pitch those comments, appropriately. So if it is a company and you know that they really haven't done much work, you can talk in terms of the resources that should have gone into that application. If it's a sole artist, it's a different type of feedback that you're going to give them.
Thank you. So over to Meg again, but I'm happy for any of the panellists to answer this. How do you deal with applications where information is missing or incomplete? I mean, we go through an eligibility check, but sometimes things like budgets don't balance, there's not enough letters of support, or they're inconclusive, the web links mightn't work. Meg, did you want to have a...
Yeah, sure. I'll welcome to hear from my esteemed peer assessors how they approach it. I have a high level of faith in the integrity of the process that Arts Queensland bring to ensuring that the applications that are in front of me are eligible and reasonably complete. If I pick up on, and I scrutinise budgets carefully, I've had to run budgets so I know what to look for if money's being spent twice, magic money, or if costs are inflated or have failed to be accounted for. I do interrogate the budget from that point of view, and if there is if I find a concern in the budget, I will definitely raise that in my feedback, and it will impact on my assessment of that application. Because if the funds haven't been well thought through, then obviously that's critical to the viability criteria of the project. If it's just a numeracy issue, I mean, I've done budgets where I'm meant to put A plus B is meant to equal C, and I've accidentally put the C figure in the B column, and, you know, sometimes that happens, and it's fairly apparent that, oh, okay, the budget is sound, and this project or activity can operate on the budget. There is an error in the form there, and so I will just note the error, but it won't impact necessarily on I won't punish people for being busy and having made a simple error. And what was the other? Oh, lack of support material. Support material is really important, and I think that our Queensland art workers, artists and organisations are still getting their head around really effective use of support material. So if I'm seeing an argument for reach or demand, I want to see some type of survey or investigation or letter of support. And the same goes with impact. If this project or activity is going to be significant, if it is going to change lives or bring something new to the sector or the art form, then I need to see some evidence of that. I don't like to be overwhelmed. If there's too much support material, then I find I need to be very, very well organised, and I actually mentally categorise different elements of support material with different criteria so that I can be systematic as I go through it, and I can have a process. Because if you're assessing quite a few at once, it can be important to have your own process that you're comfortable with, that allows you to work at a high and consistent level while still being, not taking forever to do it, because our time is valuable too. So linking support material to criteria is a useful strategy that I use. If there is a lack of support material evidencing any of the criteria, that will impact my assessment. And it might not impact it critically, it might not bring about a really low score, it might be something like there is a missed opportunity here because I'm aware that there is another organisation or artist in this region or in this sector who would be a really valuable asset to demonstrate some form of partnership or activation with. So I would just offer that as a point of feedback against that criteria as an opportunity. In other cases, for example, if a project or activity seeks to work with Indigenous artists, Indigenous people or communities, and there is no cultural protocol, there is no letter of support, for me that is a critical issue, and that would strongly impact on my assessment of that. Is that what you want?
Any other comments?
Yeah, I might just say that what you've got is essentially a framework for assessing 4 different criteria, and those 4 different criteria added up are going to give you an ultimate score. There's certainly been applications that I've come across in the past that have been really well done in a couple of areas and significantly undercooked in other areas. And you just get that gut feeling, this is actually a really good project, but obviously the applicant, for whatever reason, has really struggled to address a certain area. Often demand is one of those things. They just, demand is still, new language in some ways. And I'll go back to the Arts Queensland officer and say, look, I really can't assess this. I need additional information, and I've always had support at that level. At the same time, you get a feeling as well that you could ask for the additional information and the applicant's still not going to get there. So you can use a little bit of a judgment, call and go back to the Arts Queensland officer and just don't physically carry out the assessment because you do need further information, or if you feel confident that assessing it with what you've got is the right thing and sort of giving it some lower scores because you don't have all the information, then there's nothing wrong with it either.
And I think just to give an example of that, recently for me, there was an applicant that, and for me the budget is viability. That's where I assess project viability, is by reviewing the budget, and usually the answer to whether the project can go ahead is to be found there. And there was a significant, an application asking for a significant amount of money with also a significant budget. And in income there was quite some large figures and unconfirmed figures from other funding sources, philanthropic, from federal government, from local government, and all of it was there for the right ingredients to say that this is the holistic support. But then my issue was the unconfirmed. And so in reviewing the application, and the application was outstanding, however, the real question came with viability for me, that there was too much unconfirmed. So using the same mechanism, we went back to the applicant and said, could you review your budget and what are your plan Bs and Cs should these other significant numbers not come through? And luckily in that showcase program, you've got that opportunity to ask that question if need be. And on this occasion, unfortunately, the applicant did send through the exact same budget with the belief that it was going to go ahead. Unfortunately, that's not viable. It wasn't a viable application for me. And so the viability ranking went so low that the whole application then wasn't successful. So it comes back to that equal weight of criteria as well. Just because the quality may be outstanding is not sufficient to allow an application to go through. All 4 of those criteria need to be sufficiently met.
Thank you. So we're moving on to a question around moderation. So as a panel, how do you manage a situation during moderation where there is a disagreement on the outcome of the application? So it's really amongst the peers.
I think as peer assessors, we have a responsibility to first know our own strengths and limitations, to be very clear about our knowledge of our art form, and prior to going into that moderation meeting, to be as engaged as possible in the arts in our local area, throughout Queensland and throughout Australia, so that in the room we are really rich sources of information, and I'm clear about what I can speak to and where the limits of what I can speak to are. And I also check my motives. I'm also very clear in the conflict of interest process. Is there an applicant or project in this pool that is very dear to my heart or that raises my ire? And in which case I need to be very clear about that in the declaration of conflict of interest, and just step back from assessing that application in any way, not trying to influence the outcome. So that's very important. If it comes down to, the pools, it's a fixed envelope. There's only a certain amount of funds to go around. I welcome a healthy debate in that room. I love it when there's some different opinions brought to bear. I learn so much about the arts, which is very dear to me and goes on to make me a better peer assessor. But ultimately, it's that humility of I put forward the knowledge that I do have. Sometimes that's contextual knowledge that I bring from outside what's purely in the application, and that's really important. But I trust that the decision of the group is going to be the best decision to advance the arts in Queensland, which is what we're all there to do. So I don't dig in.
For me, the handy hint when I've come up a couple of times in the last few years in this situation, I go back to the criteria. So again, go back to the criteria, go back to the reason why you've made that decision, articulate why you've made the decision against the criteria, and have that respectful conversation. And I've been in situations where I've been able to, there's particular reasons why I've made a decision that I've put forward, which then other panel members have gone, oh, actually, yeah, we didn't see it, we weren't reading it like that, we agree with you. And likewise, I've been in situations as well where there was an application where it was literally like, I was ranking 1s, another assessor was ranking 5s. It was that divorced opinion, and it happens very rarely, but on occasion it has. But again, when you see those arguments put forward, this is why this decision's been made, you actually go, oh, actually this is the beauty of this process of having these multiple lenses, these multiple perspectives of looking at this. And that's where the mechanism and the framework really works for me. But again, it comes back to criteria. It's not about, my big belief is I'm not the arbiter of artwork. It's not my subjective opinion as to whether or not I believe this artwork should be funded. That's not the decision I'm making. What I'm looking at is has the application assessed, presented arguments against the criteria. It doesn't matter whether I would go and participate in that art form, whether I would engage or spend money to engage, to experience that art form. That's not the reason why I'm there. The reason why I'm there is purely to look at that, the arguments presented, apply it to the framework and the criteria, and see whether or not that application meets that criteria. And that's both a safety mechanism for you to sit within, but also that's where the most amazing discussions have come, where all of the assessors are actually coming from it with the arguments and the way that they read that application against the criteria, it's interesting. It's a really engaging process to be a part of.
Thank you.
Yeah, look, I think for me it is all about respect. It is, it's really interesting when you go into your first series of moderations that all of a sudden you realise, oh, I'm the odd person out here. And why are you the odd person out? You've got two other peers that are totally, different opinions to you. Use it as a learning experience. I think you'll generally find out, what strengths your fellow peers have, whether they're working in the theatre industry, the visual arts industry. I think go with your gut to a certain extent, but go with a very open mind into moderations. Sometimes I've seen a moderation come through where one person has been out of whack, and I really approach it from the point of view, okay, how can I use my strengths, in this sector to provide a little bit of assistance to upskill that person. If I speak of theatre particularly, sometimes a piece of theatre that will work brilliantly in Brisbane just won't get an audience in the regions, and we all know that. So you could actually be assessing something for a Brisbane-based performance very, very differently than you would for a Cairns-based performance. Doesn't mean that the work is changing. It just means that the demand and the impact is going to be far less in Cairns than it is in Brisbane. So you've got to keep that open mind all the time. But it is about respect. Don't go out there and just criticise your colleagues, and I don't think anybody would intentionally, but it's about what information would you like to receive back, and that's the same with the peer moderation. None of us want to be crucified. We want to learn and be respected by each other.
Thank you, Mark.
They're usually really amazing meetings, the moderation meetings. They're vibrant and fun, and you just get to sit around and talk about the arts for hours on end, so it's wonderful.
And once we actually all bond as a team,
yeah.
You will find that you will bond as a team, you'll get to know your fellow peers and really have those intellectual conversations that we all enjoy. It's probably going to be interesting, for the first few months, now that the new panel's assembled, because we don't know each other. So it's about sort of, treating a little bit carefully. Nobody wants to upset anyone, but at the same time, having the conversations that need to be had.
And I think that brings up also a very important point, is that there are the touring panel, and then there's the individuals fund and RADIF, which is round-based. But then I think, Adam, your experience is a lot more through like an email or teleconference moderation, because with QASP it is a rolling fund. Is there any tips? I mean, the email moderation I think is a little bit different from a round and panel-based moderation.
I think again, it's being succinct, and it's just distilling your arguments and presenting them so that with an email moderation, it's usually done within one or two emails. So it's not a lengthy discussion via email. It's very much, if there's a discrepancy, if there's a conflict between the assessors, it's usually resolved quite quickly. So it actually has been a very different process to learn to be able to do that. And we all know the danger of emails is that how you write something is not necessarily how the recipient reads it. So it's just being ultra aware, again, of not, we're working as colleagues, we're not trying to, it's just be careful, just be succinct is probably advice in the showcase plan. But one of the difficulties, and again, there's no answer for me yet on this one, but it is, with the showcase program, you're working in isolation. Usually it's for, no more than 3 to 5 applications at a time. That's been a big shift from the way the program's previously been run, where you would get anywhere between 20 and 30 applications in one hit. So you could really see that broad spectrum of what is in that funding round. So that's actually a skill that I'm still working on and learning, and keeping that broad mind of what's out there, of what people are asking for money to invest in. But at the end of the day, you only have what is in front of you, and there's an element of trust in the process that still stay true and authentic to the decision that I make against the criteria, and then it's for others to decide on if that application eventuates. So it's a tricky program in that rolling fund sense, but it's still. Actually, the benefit of it is that you're not sitting and reading 30 applications in one hit. It's a lot easier time-wise to be able to manage and to stay across those assessments, which is a really good benefit of the program too.
Great. So this is very much about an information sharing session. So I'd like to hand over to the audience now. We do have a roving mic if anyone would like to ask the panel any questions. So Beth, sorry, we'll take, oh, hang on, sorry.
Hi, I'm
Sorry.
Swan North. This is my second round of being a peer assessor, so I've done a previous 3 years, and so I really relate with what Adam is saying about how it used to be to how it is now. And I have to say, I do miss sitting in the room when we do have the moderation to discuss where there are disagreements, because I find on the phone it is quite difficult that the phone drops out. People tend to, have shorter periods of time, whereas if you came into somewhere, you've actually allocated the time instead of just the 10 minutes. And I was just wondering what Adam thought about that, because I find it difficult. And I know that we used to sit around the table, I think Meg was saying, for me it was a great experience because you heard what other people's experiences were, and often that actually affected how you rated within those criteria, and so I miss that.
I had some great email exchanges too, I have to say, with assessors from other parts of Queensland, and I think we'll hear Adam speak about that, but just briefly, assessing one in the past 6 months where there was very strongly divergent opinions on an application. It was all being handled by email. There was a little bit more email exchange than there usually would be. Rather than 2 or 3, there may have been 4 or 5 emails exchanged. We all really needed, it was like being in a meeting, we needed to state clearly our assessment of the application whilst maintaining very respectful language, because things can be misunderstood in emails. And so always starting, doing the praise, improvement, praise model where, my esteemed colleague brings forth useful points. In my view, these are the valid reasons. However, on the whole, I look forward to our mutually decided outcome, But it was really quite an exciting process in that way, but yeah, acknowledging the limitations too.
I don't think I've got much more. It's been a transition, and I hear what you're saying. But then again, I've probably found that we arrive at decisions quicker via the email, because there is something about taking that process to distill what you're thinking and put it into a couple of succinct bullet points. But I've had a couple of good raging, heated, interesting email discussions as well. But there was one point, and I think again this is the mechanism of support that's there. It was getting very close to where I did want to put my hand up and say, I think we need to get together in a room to discuss this. Enough with the email, or do we do by phone? And I know that those mechanisms are there, so I think it's trusting the process that if you need to, the options are there. And it is a difficult transition, or it's working in a different manner, but I think that there's still the excitement of having those discussions can still be found. I still do engage with them.
I was just going to jump in and say, with the QAS program particularly, if you there's a real positive from the point of view you actually get to see everybody's sheets. So some of the things that would never be discussed, you actually get to see, and I find that really, really interesting, because often, that group panel session, what we're doing is debating what we don't know. It's really interesting to see other people's terminologies and takes on things, the stuff that doesn't need to be discussed.
And I think you've hit the nail on the head. For me, that's the reason why the process is a lot quicker and more succinct, because I get to read the other assessors' rankings and forms. So that's where you get the information. I go, I actually wasn't looking at it like that at all. Oh, that's a really good point. So, hang on a minute, you know what? Yeah, actually I will change my ranking because I understand. So the process is made a lot quicker by not getting in a room and starting from scratch of going, well, here it is, this is why I've assessed like this. You actually are exposed to that information. So.
And in terms of bringing people who love and support the arts together, today is fantastic. I'd love to see more of today, and throw in a little bit of a guest speaker too. Bring in a really exciting local, or travelling, just make it a bit of a show.
Look, if it was at 5 o'clock, we could have a glass of champagne. Just throwing it out there.
Okay, let's get back to the topic now. Just one, Bethany, have you got a regional? Yes, sorry, Bethany.
Yeah, so we've just got a question from the live stream. This is probably one for you, Renee. Is the eligibility check completed before applications are sent for assessment?
Yes, definitely. So that's the role of the program manager for each fund, and very much the eligibility is outlined on the application form, and then that is assessed against the criteria. So there's another question.
I'm an Australia Council and an AQ assessor, about the last 3 or 4 years, and one of the key issues I've come across at both levels has been something Adam mentioned before, is the viability of a project when you're expecting funding from the Ian Potter Foundation, from Tim Fairfax, from AQ, and from the City Council and from the Australia Council. And my take on that is the opposite to Adam's. If one government source doesn't jump and decide to back a project that looks interesting artistically, that project may never happen. And I've found sitting around the table, particularly in Sydney at the Australia Council, they've been willing to take that risk with other funding sources, for example, Arts Queensland not being approved. So I'd be interested to hear other peers' versions of how they deal with that challenge, because I know that the organisation I work for most of the time is 65% government funding, and if that government funding were removed, we'd still have to find a way to function. Yeah, so how do we deal, how would AQ and how would the panel like to see us deal with a budget where there clearly will be other funding sources required that aren't yet approved?
I might just jump in there and say, it sort of goes back to that old argument as well, when you're going to recommend lesser funding for a project. And I think you've got to work out, okay, if this project is going to go ahead and the budget is compromised, what result is going to go ahead? So it's trying to, at first use that knowledge, okay, can this project go ahead with 30% less funding? Can they, bring in another funding source? But ultimately, if funding is reduced, what are you going to get? And we're not able to decide whether the Australia Council is going to give funding or whether the local council is going to give funding. But are we going to give funding through Arts Queensland? And can the project proceed, and what results is it going to achieve? And I try and use that rationale because everybody, each project is different, and sometimes a project can go ahead and still get the reach and the quality, meet demand, but it just wasn't at that level, particularly with the Playing Queensland Fund with touring casts. A high calibre cast is going to cost a lot more than a lesser grade cast, but you can still achieve the same results.
Okay.
I should just qualify, I don't use it as an inhibitor and the be-all and end-all in an application. And by, any stretch of the imagination, as you know, most applications that come through are relying on other sources of income. But in that specific example that I was giving, when there is so much unconfirmed, the hit to the project is so significant that it's actually irresponsible to say that we'll allocate funding towards that project, knowing that there's no plan B, C or D in how this project can continue. Probably not using the framework every single time where there's, as you say, a 65% investment or whatnot there. But it is, I guess it's about looking at the strengths and the other criteria as well and making that educated decision against the viability of the project as a whole moving forward.
Yeah, I think you identified it yourself when you said organisations or projects find a way to function without, full funding, and that needs to be demonstrated in the application because I can't assess what's not there. So it's about, understanding what the viability threshold is if other forms of funding are not successful in their application. However, it's usually a great strength to an application to show diverse funding streams from federal, local, philanthropic, independent revenue. It speaks to the strength of an application, not in just that they're diversifying their income streams, but also they're demonstrating a really great working knowledge of the industry and the sector and the landscape. So it's not a weakness for an application to have diverse funding streams. It's a strength, so long as the viability threshold is clear.
And probably just one last point. There is the difference between a company applying and an independent artist. So in the Showcase program, there's a lot of independent freelance artists that are applying. And so in that case in point, when there's a significant amount, and it was in excess of $400,000 in unconfirmed funding, the capacity of that independent artists, I don't believe, had the resource to fill that gap in that project, which meant that there had to be, a significant change to the nature of that project. So it is case by case, and it's looking at the resource that the applicant has and determining that, whether the project will be compromised to such an extent that it's no longer what is presented in front of you. I think that's the key point.
Bethany?
Yeah, we have another one from online. If a criterion asks for evidence, how important is it to actually see evidence as opposed to indicators?
Can I have that question again?
Tough one. So, yeah, the question was just if so there's a criteria that asks for evidence, how important is it for them to actually provide that evidence as opposed to just an indication of this
Look,
will?
I guess one thing to be aware of is the good old motherhood statement. Look, as artists, and a lot of the applications are filled out by the artists themselves, we're good at the illusion, we're good at writing, and we're good at creation. So we can create a really good application that reads fantastically well, and you read it and then you realise, but there's actually no substance here. And I think we've all seen those. It's about having the letters of support that illustrate the demand, about the CV that says, yes, these are the creatives and what they've achieved, because it is easy to fall into the trap of reading a good application that's well crafted, but in actual fact, all you've read is motherhood statements and seen something nice. And you do have to really sort of hone into those criteria and drill down on it to make sure that there is that level of succinct, either demand-driven or other qualitative, support for it. Because some applications just don't provide it, and yet they read really, really well.
Yes, I absolutely agree with that. And another piece of supporting evidence sometimes is statements by key suppliers, and so that might be a really exciting venue partnership, or it might be I'm in the literature sector, and sometimes I read applications that make statements and have really, quite sound project plans, but I look in and there's no quotations from key suppliers involved in actually producing the artworks, the literature, which is crucial evidence to support the budget.
And I get letters of support is where I find that as well. It's coming back to, has the applicant used those letters of support to their best possibility? And that's where the letters of support are by key suppliers or partnerships that confirm what it is they're bringing to the table and support those arguments. It's not about a support saying, oh, the project's really great, we want to support the project. The ones that really, you do see the difference in the application, and those letters of support really are confirming either significant budget items or significant artistic statements or engagement practices. And that's where you can, go for the letters of support to really clarify that one.
And make sure the letters of support are actually from the right people, because that will happen as well. You get letters of support which are glowing, but they actually have no relevance to what's going on. It's somebody's academic tutor or somebody like that, rather than the gallery that's putting, or that the artist is actually aiming to exhibit in.
Great. Any further questions for the panel? Yeah, Lisa.
Thank you. I'm also assessing in the same way as Adam is on the CWAS program via email. One thing I would like to say is that the moderation by the Arts Queensland project managers is really key to the success of that process. And I think they're to be congratulated, because I have had circumstances where they've had to really step in and encourage peer assessors to move through the moderation program process with a bit more efficiency. What I would like to ask though is what the process is for unsuccessful applications and the feedback to them and the follow-up for them, because that is one of the isolating things about being an assessor, is that you go, okay, no, it's not going to be successful, but you don't actually know what is being fed into those applicants in terms of supporting them to then continue with another resubmission or to reassess what they've done in terms of support material or budget or whatever.
Thanks, Lisa. It's very much on a case-by-case basis. If the applicant does contact the program manager, they're provided with feedback direct from the assessors, not noting who the assessors are, of course. A lot of the applications are resubmitted. We find that time and time again, like they're provided with an unsuccessful letter. If they're very, very keen, they call up, they work through the feedback, and then they reapply. So it's definitely very warranted, the feedback that you are providing as assessors, and how that informs, I suppose, the applicant in order to improve their writing skills. And through Arts Acumen, we're also taking the feedback from the assessment and providing resources. So for people that are just new to the application process, we're encouraging them to go onto Arts Acumen, review. So your feedback doesn't just go to the applicant, it informs us on what resources we need to provide.
And Lisa, one thing I've seen, because I too wondered that same question, but over the last 18 months, I've had one particular applicant. I've seen the project just recently, last month I think was the third time in the last 18 months I've seen that project come in for an application, and the development of the idea and the concept and the support that the way they were crafting that application, I've seen develop and grow, and I've gone, well, actually the mechanism's obviously working, because I've seen the feedback being implemented and the attempt to try and look at the way they're creating that project in a different way. So yeah, for some artists out there, I think they take that quite seriously. As you do, and as everybody would know, to say writing the no feedback takes twice as long as writing the yes feedback, and it is about really coming up with some thoughtful, hopefully constructive criticism for them to take on board. And there are those artists out there that do take that very seriously, and then come back again with their projects. So I've seen that a couple of times now.
And sometimes, like, it can just be the stream of the fund. Like with the Queensland Arts Showcase, there's the 3 streams, and sometimes people put the application into the wrong stream. So it is a simple reapplication process. And with QASP, it is a quick response, so they're turning it around quite quickly. Thanks. Bethany?
Hi, yeah, another question from online. So this is in response to Adam's point earlier about unconfirmed income affecting viability. So the question is, if all potential funding bodies don't take the risk to support the project first, the project will never be funded. Does viability only refer to financial viability, which privileges applications that already have other confirmed income, or can other factors contribute to a project's viability?
Can I just answer that before, Adam, that we need to remember that all application assessment criteria is equally valued, and viability is not just about financial viability. So I think that's possibly, where that stands as an answer, unless the panelists would like to. Great. Good. Okay. Oh, sorry, Bethany.
Sorry, another one. Is there an opportunity for applicants to revise their application if reduced funding is offered by AQ, rather than trying to anticipate not receiving the total budget?
Again, if there's a reduced funding offer, then it would usually be, the feedback would be to revise the project. Any other questions? I mean, that comes a lot. It's very unusual, I think, now with the reduced funding option, but I'd like to hear from the panel.
There's some rounds, for example, in individuals, where an individual's professional development activities might, the application might be, well assembled across a range of activities that all tie together with the unifying theme about the professional development of that artist through that period. However, because of the competitive pressure on the fund, unfortunately the round is not able to fully fund all of the worthy applicants, and so it may get to a point where there are a pool of applications which haven't been fully supported, but which definitely merit some support. And in that case, the moderation panel, and with the advice of Arts Queensland, is very careful to identify components of that application which can be funded and which leave the whole project viable. So, that can happen, and it's very thoughtfully undertaken, and with feedback from the panel about how we would recommend that the funds go towards supporting the planned activities in a way that's still viable given the reduced funding.
I don't think we sort of really have the role of saying, yes, reduce the funding. I think in an early iteration of this panel, we did used to sort of think a little bit like that. And that was sort of through our guidelines. What will happen often through moderation is that you've got a slightly iffy application, and when it's teased out a little bit, you end up with sort of the panel agreeing that, perhaps there's a bit too much fat in the budget and that it needs to be resubmitted. But we wouldn't sort of just go ahead and say, give them $20,000 less.
Yeah, and for me, the only example I can think of where that's happened in the last however many years on these panels, there was one applicant that submitted a project that was basically in 3 parts. There were 3 very distinct aspects to the project. 2 of those aspects really didn't meet any of the criteria. One of them was really strong and really deserving of funding, was really interesting. So I think that, in my experience, has been the only application in the last 3 to 6 years that I can think of where it went back to the applicant to say, the recommendation is to fund this component of your application but not the other 2, and here are the reasons why. So that was, I think it is not really a decision where I sit and look at the dollar value and break it down. It just doesn't happen.
All final? Okay, so we do have a where to from here, but unfortunately my computer is restarting. So I'll just go through a little bit and thank the panellists, Meg, Mark and Adam, for your time. We really appreciate all the information that you've shared with us. I'd also like to thank all of the Arts Queensland staff who've made this happen, and also for the Edge and all technical support. Thank you for that. And then just also to let you know that the next steps from here are, you may be contacted quite soon or in the future with regards to participating in assessment across our funds. What we do like to know is because it is, especially with QASP or PQF or different funds, your availability. So if you are going away for 3 months, please let us know. Jan Irvine, who's here today, will provide you some details with regards to getting in contact with her. We are trying to really manage that process with peer assessors. We have had an instance where one of our managers had to contact about 15 people once in order to get an assessor. So as we can understand, it is quite labour intensive from our end as well. The PowerPoint and resources will be available on Arts Acumen, and additionally the peer assessment handbook is there as really as a guide to assist you. There's also your agreements. We really encourage you to, if you do have your agreements here today or if you have completed them, to send them back in. And that we have introduced the peer assessment panel as a rolling, or pool, as a rolling pool now, so any one of your peers can apply at any time. Previous to this, it was a fixed 3-year term where no one could actually enter the pool. So we're really trying to open it up, encourage more diversity, younger applicants to become peer assessors. So please share widely. And also just to note that the Australia Council is also undertaking their peer assessment panel review, and they will be providing us with information for assessors late August. If you'd like to check out our social media and their social media, it'll be very heavily promoted, and they're looking to attract strong representation from Queensland artists, art workers and experts. So finally, I think to close, again, thank you so much for your time. We really appreciate all of your contributions. If you've already been a peer assessor and into the future, it is a role that is so important for us in order to provide to the arts sector, and we're hoping that it also provides you with networking opportunities. So thank you.